Chapter 27. The Seventh Day. The Easterners had come again last night, crept up by darkness, found a spot to climb in and killed a sentry. Then they'd set a ladder and a crowd of 'em had sneaked inside by the time they were found out. The cries had woken the dogman, hardly sleeping anyway, and he'd scrabbled awake in the black, all tangled with his blanket. Enemies inside the fortress, men running and shouting, shadows in the dark, everything reeking of panic and chaos. Men fighting by starlight, and by torchlight, and by no light at all. Blades swung with hardly a notion of where they were headed, boots stumbling and kicking showers of bright sparks out of the guttering campfires. They'd driven 'em back in the end. They'd herded them to the wall and cut them down in numbers, and only 3 had lived to drop their weapons and give up. A bad mistake for them, as it turned out. There were a lot of men dead these 7 days. Every time the sun went down there were more graves. No one was in much of a merciful mood, providing they'd been suited that way in the first place, and not many had. So when they'd caught these 3, Black Dow had trussed 'em up on the wall where Bethod and all the rest could see. Trussed 'em up in the hard blue dawn, first streaks of light just stabbing across the black sky, and he'd doused them all with oil and set a spark to them. One by one he'd done it, so the others could see what was coming and set to screaming before their turn. Dogman didn't much take to seeing men on fire. He didn't like hearing their shrieks and their fat crackling. He didn't smile at a noseful of the sick sweet stink of their burning meat, but he didn't think of trying to stop it neither. There was a time for soft opinions, and this weren't it. Mercy and weakness are the same thing in war, and there's no prizes for nice behavior. He'd learned that from Bethod a long time ago. Maybe now those Easterners would give it a second thought before they came again at night and fucked up everyone's breakfast. Might help to put some steel in the rest of the Dogman's crew besides, because more than a few were getting itchy. Some lads had tried to get away 2 nights before, given up their places and crept over the wall in the darkness, tried to get down into the valley. Bethod had their heads on spears out in front of his ditch now, a dozen battered lumps, hair blowing about in the breeze. You could hardly see their faces from the wall, but it seemed somehow they had an angry, upset sort of a look, like they blamed the dogman for leading them to this. As though he hadn't enough to worry about with the reproaches of the living. He frowned down at Bethod's camp, the shapes of his tents and his signs just starting to come up black out of the mist and the darkness, and he wondered what he could do, except for stand there and wait. All his boys were looking to him, hoping he'd pull some trick of magic to get them out of this alive. But Dogman didn't know any magic. A valley and a wall and no ways out. No ways out had been the whole point of the plan. He wondered if they could stand another day, but then he'd wondered that yesterday morning. What's Bethod planning for today, do we reckon? He murmured to himself. What's he got planned? A massacre? Grunted Grim. Dogman gave him a hard look. Attack is the word I might have picked, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get it your way before the day's out. He narrowed his eyes and stared down into the shadowy valley, hoping to see what he'd been hoping for all the last 7 long days. Some sign that the Union were coming, but there was nothing. Below Bethod's wide camp, his tents and his standards and his masses of men, there was nothing but the bare and empty land, mist clinging in the shady hollows. Tull nudged him in the ribs with a great big elbow and managed to make a grin. I don't know about this plan. Waiting for the Union and all that. Sounds a bit risky if you ask me. Any chance I can change my mind now? The dogman didn't laugh. He hadn't any laughter left. Not much. No. The giant puffed out a weighty sigh. I don't suppose there is. 7 days since the Shanka first came at the walls. 7 days, and it felt like 7 months. Logen hardly had a muscle that didn't ache from hard use. He was covered in a legion of bruises, a host of scratches, an army of grazes and knocks and burns. He had the long cut down his leg bandaged, his ribs all bound up tight from getting kicked in them, a pair of good-sized scabs under his hair, his shoulders stiff as wood from where he'd got battered with a shield, his knuckles scraped and swollen, from punching at an Easterner and catching stone instead. He was one enormous sore spot. The rest of the crowd were little better off. There was hardly a man in the whole fortress without some kind of an injury. Even Crummock's daughter had picked up a scratch from somewhere. One of Shiver's boys had lost himself a finger the day before yesterday, little one on his left hand. He was looking at it now, wrapped up tight in dirty bloody cloth, wincing. "Burns done it," he said, looking up at Logen. bunching up the rest of his fingers and opening them again. Logen should felt sorry for him, probably. He remembered the pain and the disappointment even worse, hardly able to believe that you wouldn't have that finger anymore for the whole rest of your life. But he'd got no pity left for anyone beyond himself. It surely does, he grunted. Feels like it's still there. Ay, does that feeling go away? In time? How much time? How much time? More than we've got, most likely. The man nodded, slow and grim. Aye. 7 days, and even the cold stone and wet wood of the fortress itself seemed to have had enough. The new parapets were crumbled and sagging, shored up as best they could be, and crumbled again. The gates were chopped to rotten firewood, daylight showing through the hacked-out gaps, boulders piled in behind. A firm knock might have brought them down. A firm knock might have brought Logen down, for that matter, the way he was feeling. He took a mouthful of sour water from his flask. They were getting to the rank stuff at the bottom of the barrels. Low on food, too, and on everything else. Hope, in particular, was in short and dwindling supply. Still alive, he whispered to himself, but there wasn't much triumph in it, even less than usual. Civilization might not have been all to his taste, but a soft bed, a strange place to piss, and a bit of scorn from some skinny idiots didn't seem like such a bad option right then. He was busy asking himself for the 1,000th time why he came back at all, when he heard Cromarty Fail's voice behind him. Well, bloody 9. You look tired, man. Logen frowned up. The hillman's mad blather was starting to grate on him. It's been hard work these past days, in case you hadn't noticed. I have, and I've had my part in it, haven't I, my beauties? His 3 children looked at each other. I, said the girl in a tiny voice. Crummock frowned down at them. Don't like the way the game's played no more, eh? How about you, bloody 9? The moon stopped smiling, has it? You scared, are you? Logen gave the fat bastard a long, hard look. Tired is what I am, Crummock. Tired o' your fortress, your food, and most of all, I'm tired of your fucking talk. Not everyone loves the sound of your fat lips flapping as much as you. Why don't you piss off and see if you can fit the moon up your arse? Crummock split a grin, a curve of yellow teeth standing out from his brown beard. That's the man I love, right there. One of his sons, the one that carried the spear with him, was tugging at his shirt. What the hell is it, boy? What happens if we lose, da? If we what? Growled Crummock, and he cuffed his son round the head with a great hand and knocked him on his face in the dirt. On your feet! There'll be no losing here, boy! Not while the moon loves us, muttered his sister, but not that loud. Logen watched the lad struggling up, holding a hand to his bloody mouth and looking like he wanted to cry. He knew that feeling. Probably he should have said something about treating a child that way. Maybe he would have, on the first day, or the second even. Not now. He was too tired, and too sore, and too scared to care much about it. Black Dow ambled up, something not too far from a smile across his face. The one man in the whole camp who might have been said to be in a better mood than usual. And you know you're in some sorry shit when Black Dow starts smiling. 9 fingers, he grunted. Dow, run out of men to burn, have you? Reckon Bethod'll be sending me some more presently. He nodded towards the wall. What do you think he'll send today? After what we gave him last night? I reckon those Krynna bastards are just about done. Bloody savages. I reckon they are at that. Bloody savages. I reckon they are at that. And there have been no Shanka for a few days now. 4 days since he sent the flatheads at us. Logen squinted up at the sky, slowly getting lighter. Looks like good weather today. Good weather for armor and swords and men walking shoulder to shoulder. Good weather to try and finish us. Wouldn't be surprised if he sends the Carls today. Nor me. His best, said Logen from way back. Wouldn't be surprised to see Whitesides and Goring and Pale as Snow and fucking Littlebone and all of the rest come strolling up to the gate after breakfast. Dow snorted. His best. Right crowd o' cunts, those. And he turned his head and spat onto the mud. You'll get no argument from me, that's so. Didn't you fight alongside 'em? All those hard and bloody years? I did. But I can't say I ever much liked 'em. Well, if it's any consolation, I doubt they think too much o' you these days. Dow gave him a long look. When did Bethod stop suiting you, eh? None of fingers. Logen stared back at him. Hard to say. Bit by bit, I reckon. Maybe you got to be more of a bastard as time went on. Or maybe I got to be less of one. Or maybe there ain't room on one side for two bastards as big as the pair of you? Oh, I don't know. Logen got up. You and me work real sweet together. He stalked away from Dow, thinking about what easy work Malachus Quai and Pharaoh Malgene and even Jezal Dan Luther had been. 7 days, and they were all at each other's throats. All angry, all tired. 7 days. The one consolation was that there couldn't be many more. They're coming. Dogman's eyes flicked sideways. Like most of the few things Grimm said. It hardly needed saying. They could all see it as clearly as the sun rising. Bethod's carls were on the move. They were in no hurry. They came on stiff and steady, painted shields held up in front, eyes to the gateway. Standards flapped over their heads, signs the Dogman recognized from way back. He wondered how many of those men down there he'd fought alongside. How many of their faces he could put a name to. How many he'd drunk with, eaten with, laughed with, that he'd have to do his best to put back in the mud. He took a long breath. The battlefield's no place for sentiment. Three Trees had told him once, and he'd taken it right to heart. All right, he lifted up his hand as the men around him on the tower readied their bows. Hold on to 'em for a minute yet. The carls stomped on through the churned-up mud, and the broken rocks where the valley narrowed, past the bodies of Easterners, and Shanka, left twisted where they lay, hacked or crushed, or stuck with broken arrows. They didn't falter or lose a step. The wall of shields shifted as they came, but didn't break. Not the slightest gap. They marched tight, muttered Tull. Aye, too tight, the bastards. They were getting close now. Close enough that Dogman had to try some arrows. All right, boys. Aim high and let 'em drop. The first flight went hissing from the tower, arced up high, and started to fall on that tight column. They shifted their shields to meet them, and arrows thudded into painted wood, spun off helmets and glanced off mail. A couple found marks. A shriek went up. Holes showed here or there, but the rest just stepped on over, trudging up towards the wall. Dogman frowned at the barrels where the shafts were kept. Less than quarter full now, and most of those dug out from dead men. Careful now. Pick your marks. Lads, said Grimm, pointing down below. A good-sized pack of men were scurrying out from the ditch, dressed in stiff leather and steel-capped. They formed up in a few neat rows, kneeling down, tending to their weapons. Flatbows, like the Union used. Get down, shouted Dogman. Those nasty little bows rattled and spat. Most of the boys on the tower were well behind their parapet by then, but one optimist who'd been leaning out got a bolt through his mouth, swayed and toppled, silent, off the tower. Another took one in his chest, breathing with a wheeze like wind through a split pine. All right, give 'em something back. They all came up at once and sent down a volley. Strings humming, peppering those bastards with plunging shafts. Their bows might not have had the same spit to aim, but with the height the arrows still came hard, and Bethod's archers had nothing to hide behind. More than a few fell back or started crawling away, screaming and squealing, but the rank behind pushed through, slow and steady, knelt down and aimed their flatbows. Another flight of bolts came hissing up. Men ducked and threw themselves down. Men ducked and threw themselves down. One zipped right past the Dogman's head and clicked off the rock face behind. Pure luck he didn't get pinned with it. A couple of the others were less lucky. One lad was lying on his back, a pair of bolts stuck in his chest, peering down at him and whispering shit to himself, over and over. Bastards! Let 'em have it back! Shafts and bolts started flapping up both ways, men shouting and taking aim, all anger and gritted teeth. Steady! Shouted Dogman. Steady, but no one hardly heard him. With the extra poke from the height and the cover they had from the walls, didn't take long for Dogman's boys to get the upper hand. Bethod's archers started scrambling back, then a couple dropped their flatbows and made a run for it, one getting a shaft right through his back. The rest started to break for the ditch, leaving their wounded crawling in the mud. Said Grimm again. While they'd been busy trading shafts, the carls had made it right to the gate, shields up over their heads against the rocks and arrows the hillmen were chucking down. They'd got the ditch filled in a day or two before, and now the column opened up in the middle, and those mailed men moved like they were passing something to the front. Dogman caught a glimpse of it, a long, thin tree trunk, cut down to use as a ram, branches left on short so men could give it a firm swing. Dogman heard the first tearing crash of it working at their sorry excuse for a gate. "Shit," he muttered. Knots of thralls were charging forward now, light-armed and light-armored, carrying ladders between them, counting on speed to make it to the walls. Plenty fell, pricked with spear or arrow, knocked with rocks. Some of their ladders were pushed back, but they were quick and full of bones, and stuck to their task. Soon there were a couple of groups on the walls, while more pressed up the ladders behind, fighting with Crummock's people, and getting the better by pure freshness and weight of numbers. Now there was a big crack, and the gate went down. Dogman saw that tree trunk swing one last time and cave one door right in. The Carls struggled with the other and heaved it open, a couple of stones bouncing from the shields and spinning away. The front few started pressing forwards through the gate. "Shit," said Grim. "They're through," breathed the Dogman, and he watched Bethod's Carls push on into that narrow gap in a mailed tide, trampling the shattered gates under their heavy boots, dragging the rocks behind out of the way, their bright painted shields up, their bright polished weapons ready. To either side the thralls swarmed up their ladders and onto the wall, pressing Crummock's hillmen back down the walkways. Like a high river bursting a dam, Bethod's host flowed into the broken fortress, first in a trickle, and soon in a flood. "I'm going down," snarled Tull, dragging his great long sword out of its sheath. Dogman thought about trying to stop him, but then he just nodded, tired, and watched the Thunderhead charge off down the steps, a few others following. There was no point getting in their way. Seemed like it was fast reaching that time. Time for each man to choose where he'd die. Logen saw them come through the gates, up the ramp and into the fortress. Time seemed to move slow. He saw each design on each shield, picked out sharp in the morning sun-black tree, red bridge, 2 wolves on green, 3 horses on yellow. Metal glinted and flashed shield's rim. Mails ring, spears point, swords edge. On they came, yelling their battle cries, high and thin, the way they'd done for years. The breath crawled in and out of Logen's nose. The thralls and the hillmen fought on the walls as if they were under water, their sounds dull and muffled. His palms sweated and tickled, and itched as he watched the Carls break in. Hardly seemed as if it could be true that he had to charge into those bastards and kill as many as he could. What a damn fool notion. He felt that powerful need, as he always had at times like that, to turn and run. All around he felt the fear of the others, their uncertain shuffling, their edging backwards. A sensible enough instinct, except there was nowhere now to run to. Nowhere except forwards into the teeth of the enemy, and hope to drive them out before they could get a foothold. There was nothing to think about. It was their only chance. So Logen lifted the Maker's sword high, and he gave a meaningless scream, and he started running. He heard the shouts around him, felt the men moving with him, the jostling and rattling of weapons, the ground, and the wall, and the Carls he ran at jolted and wobbled. His boots pounded on the earth, his own quick breath hissed and rushed with the wind. He saw the Carls hurrying to set their shields, to form a wall, to make ready their spears and their weapons. But they were in a mess after coming through that narrow gate, flustered by the screaming mass of men charging down on them. The war cries died in their throats and their faces sagged from triumph to shock. A couple at the edges started to have doubts, and they faltered and shuffled back, and then Logen and the rest were on them. He managed to twist around a wobbling spear and land a good hard chop on a shield with all the force of his charge, knock his man sprawling in the mud. Logen hacked at his leg as he tried to get up, and the blade cut through mail and left a long gash in flesh, brought him shrieking down again. Logen swung at another Carl, felt the Maker's sword squeal against the metal rim of a shield and slide into flesh. A man gurgled, vomited blood down the front of his mailcoat. Logen saw an axe thud into a helmet and leave a dent the size of a fist in it. He reeled out of the way of a spear thrust, and it stuck in the ribs of a man beside him. A sword hacked into a shield and sent splinters flying into Logen's eyes. He blinked and dodged, slid in the muck, chopped at an arm as it tore at his coat, and felt it break, flapping in its mail sleeve. Eyes rolled in a bloody face. Eyes rolled in a bloody face. Something shoved him in the back and nearly pushed him onto a sword. There was hardly space to swing, then there was no space at all. Men crushed in from behind, crushed in through the gate, adding their straining, mindless weight to the press in the center. Logen was squashed in tight, shoulder to shoulder. Men gasped and grunted, dug and elbowed at each other, stabbed with knives and gouged at faces with their fingers. He thought he saw little bone in the press, teeth bared in a snarl, long gray hair straggling out from under a helmet set with whorls of gold, spattered with streaks of red, shouting himself hoarse. Logen tried to press towards him, but the blind currents of battle snatched him away and carried them far apart. He stabbed at someone under a shield rim, winced as he felt something dig into his hip. A long, slow, burning, getting worse and worse. He growled as the blade cut, not swung or thrust, just held there while he was squashed up against it. He thrashed with his elbows, with his head managed to twist away from the pain, felt the wetness of blood down his leg. He found himself with room, got his sword hand free, hacked at a shield, chopped a head open on the backswing, then found himself shoved up against it, his face pressed into warm brains. He saw a shield jerk up out of the corner of his eye. The edge caught him in the throat, under the chin, snapped his head back and filled his skull with blinding light. He dragged himself nowhere, clutching at dirt, spitting blood, boots squelching and straining in the mud all around him, crawling through a dark, terrifying, shifting forest of legs, the screams of pain and rage filtering down from above with the flickering light. Feet kicked at him, stomped on him, battered at every part of him. He tried to struggle up and a boot in the mouth sent him limp again. He rolled over, gasping, saw a bearded Carl in the same state, impossible to say which side he was on, trying to push himself up out of the mud. Their eyes met for a moment, then a glinting spear blade shot down from above and stabbed the Carl in the back. Once, twice, 3 times, he went limp, blood gurgling down through his beard. There were bodies all around, on their faces and their sides, lying in amongst the dropped and broken gear, kicked and knocked around like children's dolls, some of them still twitching, clutching, grunting. Logen squawked as a boot squelched down hard on his hand, crushing his fingers into the muck. He fumbled a knife from his belt and started slashing weakly at the leg above it. Bloody teeth gritted. Something cracked him in the top of the head and sent him sprawling on his face again. The world was a noisy blur, a painful smear, a mass of feet and anger. He didn't know which way he was facing, which way was up or down. His mouth tasted of metal, thirsty. There was blood in his eyes, mud in his eyes. His head was pounding. He wanted to be sick, back to the north and get some vengeance. What the fuck had he been thinking? Someone screamed, stuck with a flatbow bolt, but the dogman had no time to worry about him. Whiteside's thralls were up on the wall under the tower, and a few had got around and onto the stairway. They were charging up it now, or as close as they could get to a charge on those narrow steps. Dogman dropped his bow and fumbled his sword out from its sheath, got a knife ready in the other hand. A few of the others took up spears, gathered round the head of the stairway as the thralls came up. Dogman swallowed. He'd never been much for fights like this, toe-to-toe. No more'n the length of an axe from your enemies. He'd rather have kept things to a polite distance, but that didn't seem to be what these bastards had in mind. An awkward kind of a fight started up at the top of the steps, defenders poking with spears, trying to shove the thralls off, them poking back, shoving with shields, trying to get a foothold on the platform at the top, everyone taking care in case. They took the long drop right back to the mud. One charged through with a spear, screaming at the top of his lungs, and Grim shot him in the face. Cool as you like, no more'n a stride or two distant. He staggered a step or two, bent right over with the flights of the arrows sticking out his mouth and the point out the back of his neck. Then Dogman took the top of his head off with his sword and sent his corpse sprawling. A big thrall with wild red hair leaped up the steps, swinging a big axe, roaring like a madman. He got round a spear and felled an archer with a blow that spattered blood across the rock face, charged on through, folk scattering out on the way. Dogman dithered, trying to look like he was an idiot. Then when the axe came down, he dodged left and the blade missed him by a whisker. The red-haired thrall stumbled, tired from getting over the wall and up all them steps, most likely. A long way to climb, especially with nothing but your death at the end of it. Dogman kicked hard at the side of his knee and his leg buckled. He yelled as he lurched towards the edge of the stairs. Dogman chopped at him with his sword, caught him a slash across the back, hard enough to send him over the edge. He dropped his axe, screamed as he tumbled through the empty air. Dogman felt something move, turned just in time to see another thrall coming at him from the side. He twisted round and knocked the first sword cut clear, gasped as he felt the second thud cold into his arm, heard his sword clatter out of his limp hand. He jerked away from another swing, tripped and went down on his back. The thrall came at him, lifting up his sword to finish the job, but before he got Morn astride, Grim loomed up quick from the side, caught hold of his sword arm and held it pinned. Dogman scrambled up, taking a hard grip on his knife with his good hand, and stabbed the thrall right in his chest. They stayed there, the three of them, tangled up tight together, still in the midst of all that madness, for as long as it took for the man to die. Then Dogman pulled his knife free and Grim let him fall. They'd got the best of it up on the tower, at least for now. There was just one thrall left on his feet, and while the Dogman watched, a couple of his lads herded him up to the parapet and poked him off with spears. There were corpses scattered all about the place, a couple of dozen thralls, maybe half that many of the Dogman's boys. One of them was propped against the cliff face, chest heaving as he breathed, face pasty pale, bloody hands clutched to his slashed guts. Dogman's hand wouldn't work right. The fingers dangled useless. He tugged his shirt sleeve up, saw a long gash oozing from his elbow almost all the way to his wrist. His guts gave a heave, and he coughed a bit of burning puke up and spat it out. Wounds on other people you can get used to. Cuts out of your own flesh always have a horror to 'em. Down below, inside the wall, the fight was joined and nothing but a boiling, tight-pressed mass. Dogman could hardly tell which men were on which side. He stood frozen, bloody knife clutched in one bloody hand. There were no answers now, no plans. It was every man for himself. If they lived out the day, it would be by luck alone, and he was starting to doubt he had that much luck left. He felt someone tugging at his sleeve. Grim. He followed his pointed finger with his eyes. Beyond Bethod's camp, down in the valley, a great cloud of dust was coming up, a brown haze. Underneath, glittering in the morning sun, the armor of horsemen. His hand clamped tight round Grim's wrist, hope suddenly flickering alive again. "Fucking Union," he breathed, hardly daring to believe it. West squinted through his eyeglass, lowered it, and peered up the valley, squinted through it again. "You're sure?" "Yes, sir." Jalenholm's big, honest face was streaked with the dirt of 8 days' hard riding, and it looks as if they're still holding out, just barely. "General Polder," snapped West. "My Lord Marshal," murmured Polder with his newly acquired veneer of sycophancy. "Are the cavalry ready to charge?" The general blinked. "They are not properly deployed, have been riding hard these past days, and would be charging uphill over broken ground, and at a strong and determined enemy. They will do as you order, of course, Lord Marshal. But it might be prudent to wait for our infantry to—" "Prudence is a luxury." West frowned up towards that innocuous space between the two fells. "Attack at once, while the Dogman and his Northmen still held out. They might enjoy the advantage of surprise, and crush Bethod between them. But the cavalry would be charging uphill, men and mounts disorganized and fatigued from hard marching. Or wait for the infantry to arrive, still some hours behind, and mount a well-planned assault. But by then would the Dogman and his friends have been slaughtered to a man, their fortress taken, and Bethod well prepared to meet an attack from one side only? West chewed at his lip, trying to ignore the fact that thousands of lives hung upon his decision. To attack now was the greater risk, but might offer the greater rewards. A chance to finish this war within a bloody hour. They might never again catch the king of the Northmen off guard. What was it that Burr had said to him the night before he died? One cannot be a great leader without a certain ruthlessness. Prepare the charge, and deploy our infantry across the mouth of the valley as soon as they arrive. We must prevent Bethod and any of his forces from escaping. If sacrifices are to be made, I intend that they be meaningful." Polder looked anything but convinced. "Will you force me to agree with General Croy's assessment of your fighting qualities, General Polder? Or do you intend to prove the two of us wrong?" The general snapped to attention, his mustaches vibrating with new eagerness. He gave his black charger the spurs and flew off up the valley towards the place where the dusty cavalry were massing, pursued by several members of his staff. West shifted in his saddle, chewing worriedly at his lip. His head was beginning to hurt again. A charge uphill, against a determined enemy. Colonel Glokta would no doubt have grinned at the prospect of such a deadly gamble. Prince Ladisla would have approved of such cavalier carelessness with other men's lives. Lord Smund would have slapped backs and talked of vim and vigor and called for wine. And only look what became of those three heroes. Logen heard a great roar, faint and far away. Light came at his half-closed eyes, as though the fight was opened up wide. Shadows flickered. A great boot squelched in the filth in front of his face. Voices bellowed, far above. He felt himself grabbed by the shirt, dragged through the mud, feet and legs thrashing all around him. He saw the sky, painful bright, blinked and dribbled at it. He lay still, limp as a rag. "Logen, you all right? Where you hurt?" He croaked, then started coughing. "Do you know me?" Something slapped at Logen's face, slapped some sluggish thought into his head. A shaggy shape loomed over him, dark against the bright sky. Logen squinted at it. Tulduru Thunderhead, unless he was much mistaken. What the hell was he doing here? Thinking was painful. The more Logen thought, the more pain he was in. His jaw was on fire, feeling twice the size it usually did. His every breath was a shuddering, slavering gasp. Above him the big man's mouth moved, and the words boomed and rang against Logen's ears, but they were nothing but noise. His leg prickled unpleasantly, far away. His own heartbeat leaped and jerked and pounded at his head. He heard sounds, clashing and rattling, coming at him from all sides, and the sounds themselves hurt him, made his jaw burn all the worse, unbearable. The air rasped and clicked, but no sound would come. It wasn't his voice any longer. He reached out with his last strength, and he put his palm against Tull's chest, and he tried to push him away, but the big man only caught his hand and pressed it with his own. "It's all right," he growled. "I've got you." Whispered Logen, and the smile spread out across his bloody mouth. He gripped that great hand with a sudden, terrible strength, and with his other fist he found the handle of a knife, tucked down warm against his skin. The good blade darted out, swift as the snake, and just as deadly, and sank into the big man's thick neck to the hilt. He looked surprised as the hot blood poured from his open throat, drooled from his open mouth, soaked his heavy beard, dribbled from his nose and down his chest, but he shouldn't have. To touch the bloody nine was to touch death, and death has no favorites, and makes no exceptions. The bloody nine rose up, shoving the great corpse away from him, and his red fist closed tight around the giant's sword, a heavy length of star-bright metal, dark and beautiful, a righteous tool for the work that awaited him. So much work, but good work is the best of blessings. The bloody nine opened his mouth, and shrieked out all his bottomless love, and his endless hate in one long wail. The ground rushed underneath him, and the heaving, writhing, beautiful battle reached out and took him in its soft embrace, and he was home. The faces of the dead shifted, blurred around him, roaring their curses and bellowing their anger, but their hate of him only made him stronger. The long sword flung men out of his path and left them twisted and broken, hacked and drooling, howling with happiness. Who fought who was none of his concern. The living were on one side, and he was on the other, and he carved a red and righteous way through their ranks. An axe flashed in the sun, a bright curve like the waning moon, and the bloody nine slid below it, kicked a man away with a heavy boot. He lifted up a shield, but the great sword split the painted tree, and the wood beneath it, and the arm beneath that, and tore open the mail behind as though it was nothing but a cobweb, and split his belly like a sack of angry snakes. A boy-child cowered and slithered away on his back, clutching at a great shield, and an axe too big for him to lift. The bloody nine laughed at his fear, teeth bared bright and smiling. A tiny voice seemed to whisper for restraint, but the bloody nine hardly heard it. His sword hard swung split big shield and small body together and sprayed blood across the dirt and the stone and the stricken faces of the men watching. "Good," he said, and he showed his bloody smile. He was the great leveler. Man or woman, young or old, all were dealt with exactly alike. That was the brutal beauty of it, the awful symmetry of it, the perfect justice of it. There could be no escape and no excuses. He came forward, taller than the mountains, and the men shuffled and muttered and spread out from him, a circle of shields, of painted designs, of flowering trees, and rippling water, and snarling faces. Their words tickled at his ears. It's him. 9 fingers, the bloody 9. A circle of fear, with him at the center, and they were wise to fear. Their deaths were written in the shapes of sweet blood on the bitter ground. Their deaths were whispered in the buzzing of the flies on the corpses beyond the wall. Their deaths were stamped on their faces, carried on the wind, held in the crooked line between the mountains and the sky. Dead men, all. "Who's next to the mud?" he whispered. A bold Carl stepped forward, a shield on his arm with a coiled serpent upon it. Before he could even lift his spear, the bloody 9 sword had made it a great circle, above the top of his shield and below the bottom of his helmet. The point of the blade stole the jawbone from his head, cleaved into the shoulder of the next man, ate deep into his chest, and drove him into the earth, blood flying from his silent mouth. Another man loomed up, and the sword fell on him like a falling star, crushed his helmet and the skull beneath it down to his mouth. The body dropped on its back and danced a merry jig in the dirt. "Dance!" laughed the bloody 9, and the sword reeled around him. He filled the air with blood and broken weapons and the parts of men, and these good things wrote secret letters and described sacred patterns that only he could see and understand. Blades pricked and nicked and dug at him, but they were nothing. He repaid each mark upon his burning skin 100-fold. And the bloody 9 laughed, and the wind, and the fire, and the faces on the shields laughed with him, and could not stop. He was the storm in the high places, his voice as terrible as the thunder, his arm as quick, as deadly, as pitiless as the lightning. He ran the sword through a man's guts, ripped it back, and smashed a man's mouth apart with the pommel, snatched his spear away with his free hand, and flung it through the neck of a third, split a Carl's side yawning open as he passed. He reeled, spun, rolled, drunk and dizzy, spitting fire and laughter. He forged a new circle about him, a circle as wide as the giant's sword, a circle in which the world belonged to him. His enemies lurked beyond its limit now, shuffled back from it, full of fear. They knew him, he could see it in their faces. They had heard whispers of his work, and now he had given them a bloody lesson, and they knew the truth of it, and he smiled to see them enlightened. The foremost of them held up his open hand, bent forward and laid his axe down on the ground. "You are forgiven," whispered the bloody 9, and let his own sword clatter to the dirt. Then he darted forward and seized the man by his throat, lifting him up into the air with both his hands. He thrashed and kicked and wrestled, but the bloody 9's red grip was the swelling ice that bursts the very bones of the earth apart. "You are forgiven." His hands were made of iron, and his thumbs sunk deeper and deeper into the man's neck until blood welled up from under them, and he lifted the kicking corpse out to arm's length and held it above him until it was still. He flung it away, and it fell upon the mud and flopped over and over in a manner that greatly pleased him. Forgiven, he walked to the bright archway through a cringing crowd, shying away like sheep from the wolf, leaving a muddy path through their midst, strewn with their fallen shields and weapons. Beyond, in the sun, bright armored horsemen moved across the dusty valley, their swords twinkling as they rose and fell, herding running figures this way and that, riding between the high standards, rippling gently in the wind. He stood in that ragged gateway, with the splintered doors under his boots, and the corpses of his friends and of his enemies scattered about him, and he heard the sounds of men cheering victory. And Logen closed his eyes and breathed. Chapter 28. Too many masters. In spite of the hot summer day outside, the banking hall was a cool, dim, shadowy place, a place full of whispers and quiet echoes, built of sharp, dark marble like a new tomb. Such thin shafts of sunlight as broke through the narrow windows were full of wriggling dust motes. There was no smell to speak of, except the stench of dishonesty, which even I find almost overpowering. The surroundings may be cleaner than the House of Questions, but I suspect there is more truth told among the criminals. There were no piles of shining gold ingots on display. There was not so much as a single coin in evidence, only pens and ink and heaps of dull paper. Valent and Balk's employees were not swaddled in fabulous robes such as Magister Colt of the Mercers had worn. They did not sport flashing jewels as Magister Eider of the Spicers had. They were small, gray-dressed men with serious expressions. The only flashing was from the odd pair of studious eyeglasses. So this is what true wealth looks like. This is how true power appears, the austere temple of the golden goddess. He watched the clerks working at their neat stacks of documents, at their neat desks arranged in neat rows. There the acolytes, inducted into the lowest mysteries of the church. His eyes flickered to those waiting, merchants and moneylenders, shopkeepers and shysters, traders and tricksters in long queues, or waiting nervously on hard chairs around the hard walls. Fine clothes, perhaps, but anxious manners. The fearful congregation, ready to cower should the deity of commerce show her vengeful streak. But I am not her creature. Glokta shouldered his way past the longest queue, the tip of his cane squealing loud against the tiles, snarling, "I am crippled!" If one of the merchants dared to look his way, the clerk blinked at him when he reached the front of the line. "How may I Malthus?" barked Glokta. "And who shall I say is the cripple? Convey me to the high priest, that I might cleanse my crimes in banking notes. Act not simply, you are expected." Another clerk, a few rows back, had stood up from his desk. "Please come with me." Glokta gave the unhappy queue a toothless leer as he limped out between the desks toward a door in the far, paneled wall, but his smile did not last. Beyond it, a set of high steps rose up, light filtering down from a narrow window at the top. What is it about power, that it has to be higher up than everyone else? Can a man not be powerful on the ground floor? He cursed and struggled up after his impatient guide, then dragged his useless leg down a long hallway with many high doors on either side. The clerk leaned forward and humbly knocked at one, waited for a muffled lies, and opened it. Malthus sat behind a monumental desk watching Glokta hobble over the threshold. His face could have been carved from wood for all the warmth or welcome it displayed. On the expanse of blood-colored leather before him, pens and ink and neat piles of papers were arranged with all the merciless precision of recruits on a parade ground. "The visitor you were expecting, sir." The clerk hastened forward with a sheaf of documents. "And there are also these for your attention." Malthus turned his emotionless eyes to them. Yes, all these to talons." Glokta did not wait to be asked. "And I've been in pain for far too long to pretend not to be." He took a lurching step and sagged into the nearest chair, stiff leather creaking uncomfortably under his aching arse. "But it will serve." The papers crackled as Malthus leafed through them, his pen scratching his name at the bottom of each one. He paused at the last. "And no, this must be called in at once." He reached forward and took hold of a stamp, its wooden handle polished by long use, and rocked it carefully in its tray of red ink. It thumped down against the paper with a disturbing finality. And is some merchant's life squashed out under that stamp, do we suppose? Is that ruin and despair so carelessly administered? Is that wives and children out upon the street? There is no blood here, there are no screams, and yet men are destroyed as completely as they are in the House of Questions, and with a fraction of the effort. Glokta's eyes followed the clerk as he hurried out with the documents. Or is it merely a receipt for 10 bits refused? Who can say? The door was pulled softly and precisely shut with the gentlest of smooth clicks. Malthus paused only to align his pen precisely with the edge of his desk. Then he looked up at Glokta. "I am truly grateful that you have answered promptly," Glokta snorted. The tone of your note did not seem to allow for delay. He winced as he lifted his aching leg with both hands and heaved his dirty boot up onto the chair beside him. "I hope you will return the favor and come promptly to the point. I am extremely busy. I have magi to destroy and kings to bring down, and if I cannot do one or the other, I have a pressing appointment to have my throat cut and be tossed in the sea." Malthus' face did not so much as flicker. Once again, "I find that my superiors are not best pleased with the direction of your investigations." "Is that so? Your superiors are people of deep pockets and shallow patience? What now offends their delicate sensibilities?" "Your investigation into the lineage of our new king, His August Majesty Jezal I." Glokta felt his eye twitch, and he pressed his hand against it with a sour sucking of his gums. "In particular your inquiries into the person of Carmi Dan Roth, the circumstances of her untimely demise, and the closeness of her friendship with our previous king, Guslav V. Do I come close enough to the point for your taste? A little closer than I would like, in fact. Those inquiries have scarcely even begun. I find it surprising that your superiors are so very well informed. Do they acquire their information from a crystal ball, or a magic mirror, or from someone at the House of Questions who likes to talk? Or from someone closer to me even than that, perhaps? Mothis sighed. Or at least he allowed some air to issue from his face. I told you to assume that they know everything. You will discover it is no exaggeration, particularly if you choose to try and deceive them. I would advise you very strongly against that course of action. Believe me when I say, muttered Glokta through tight lips, that I have no interest whatsoever in the king's parentage. But his eminence has demanded it, and keenly awaits a report of my progress. What am I to tell him? Mothis stared back with a face full of sympathy. As much sympathy as one stone might have for another. My employers do not care what you tell them, provided that you obey them. I see that you find yourself in a difficult position, but, speaking plainly, superior, I do not see a choice for you. I suppose you could go to the Archlector and lay before him the whole history of our involvement, the gift you took from my employers, the conditions under which it was given, the consideration you have already extended to us. Perhaps His Eminence is more forgiving of divided loyalties than he appears to be. Huh? Snorted Glokta. If I did not know better, I might have almost taken that for a joke. His Eminence is only slightly less forgiving than a scorpion, and we both know it. Or you could honor your commitment to my employers and do as they demand. They asked for favors when I signed the damn receipt. Now they make demands? Where does it end? That is not for me to say, superior, or for you to ask. Mothis' eyes flickered towards the door. He leaned across his desk and spoke soft and low. But if my own experience is anything to go by, it will not end. My employers have paid, and they always get what they have paid for. Always. Glokta swallowed. It would seem that, in this case, they have paid for my abject obedience. It would not normally be a difficulty, of course. I am every bit as abject as the next man, if not more so. But the Archlector demands the same. Two well-informed and merciless masters in direct opposition begins too late to seem like one too many. Too many, some might say, but as Mothis so kindly explains, I have no choice. He slid his boot off the chair, leaving a long streak of dirt across the leather, and shifted his weight painfully as he began the long process of getting up. Is there anything else? Or do your employers merely wish me to defy the most powerful man in the Union? They wish you also to watch him. Glokta froze. They wish me to what? There has been a great deal of change of late, superior. Change means new opportunities, but too much change is bad for business. My employers feel a period of stability is in everyone's best interests. They are satisfied with the situation. Mothis clenched his pale hands together on the red leather. They are concerned that some figures within the government may not be satisfied, that they may seek further change, that their rash actions might lead to chaos. His Eminence concerns them especially. They wish to know what he does, what he plans. They wish, in particular, to know what he is doing in the university. Glokta gave a splutter of disbelieving laughter. Is that all? The irony was wasted on Mothis. For now, it might be best if you were to leave by the back entrance. My employers will expect news within the week. Glokta grimaced as he struggled down the narrow staircase at the back of the building, sideways on like a crab, the sweat standing out from his forehead, and not just from the effort. How could they know? First that I was looking into Prince Renault's death, against the Archlector's orders, and now that I am looking into Our Majesty's mother, on the Archlector's behalf? Assume they know everything, of course. But no one knows anything without being told. Who told? Who asked the questions about the prince and about the king? Whose first loyalty is to money? Who has already given me up once to save his skin? Glokta paused for a moment in the middle of the steps and frowned. Oh, dear, dear. Is it every man for himself now? Has it always been? The pain shooting up his wasted leg was the only reply. Chapter 29, Sweet Victory. West sat, arms crossed upon his saddle-bow, staring numbly up the dusty valley. We won, said Pike, in a voice without emotion. Just the same voice in which he might have said, we lost. A couple of tattered standards still stood, hanging lifeless. Bethod's own great banner had been torn down and trampled beneath horses' hooves, and now its threadbare frame stuck up at a twisted angle, above the settling fog of dust, like clean-picked bones. A fitting symbol for the sudden fall of the king of the Northmen. Polder reined in his horse beside West, smiling primly at the carnage like a schoolmaster at an orderly classroom. "How did we fare, General?" "Casualties appear to have been heavy, sir, especially in our front ranks, but the enemy were largely taken by surprise. Most of their best troops were already committed to the attack on the fortress. Once our cavalry got them on the run, we drove them all the way to the wall. Picked their camp clean." Polder wrinkled his nose, mustaches trembling with distaste. "Several hundred of those devilish Shanka we put to the sword, and a much greater number we drove off into the hills to the north, from whence, I do not doubt, they will be greatly reluctant to return. We wrought a slaughter among the Northmen to satisfy King Casimir himself, and the rest have laid down their arms. We guess at 5,000 prisoners, sir. Bethod's army has been quite crushed." "Crushed?" He gave a girlish chuckle. "No one could deny that you have well and truly avenged the death of Crown Prince Ladisla today, Lord Marshal." West swallowed. "Of course. Well and truly avenged. A master stroke, to use our Northmen as a decoy. A bold and a decisive maneuver. I am, and will always be, honored to have played my small part. A famous day for Union arms." Marshal Burr would have been proud to see it. West had never in his life expected to receive praise from General Polder, but now the great moment had come. He found that he could take no pleasure in it. He had performed no acts of bravery. He had taken no risks with his own life. He had done nothing but say charge. He felt saddle-sore and bone-weary. His jaw ached from being constantly clenched with worry. Even speaking seemed an effort. "Is Bethod among the dead, or the captured?" "As to specific prisoners, sir, I could not say. It may be that our northern allies have him." Polder gave vent to a jagged chuckle. "In which case I doubt he'll be with us much longer, eh, Marshal?" Sergeant Pike!" He grinned as he drew his fingers sharply across his belly and clicked his tongue. "The bloody cross for him. I shouldn't wonder. Isn't that what they do, these savages? The bloody cross, isn't it?" West did not see the funny side. "Ensure that our prisoners are given food and water, and such assistance with their wounded as we are able to provide. We should be gracious in victory." It seemed like the sort of thing that a leader should say after a battle. "Quite so, my Lord Marshal." And Polder gave a smart salute, the very model of an obedient underling, then reined his mount sideways and spurred away. West slid down from his own horse, gathered himself for a moment, and began to trudge on foot up the valley. Pike came after him, sword drawn. "Can't be too careful, sir," he said. "No," murmured West. "I suppose not." The long slope was scattered with men, alive and dead. The corpses of Union horsemen lay where they had fallen. Surgeons tended to the wounded with bloody hands and grim faces. Some men sat and wept, perhaps by fallen comrades. Some stared numbly at their own wounds. Others howled and gurgled, screamed for help or water. Still others rushed to bring it to them. Final kindnesses for the dying. A long procession of sullen prisoners was winding down the valley alongside the rock wall, watched carefully by mounted Union soldiers. Nearby were tangled heaps of surrendered weapons, piles of mailcoats, stacks of painted shields. West picked his way slowly through what had been Bethod's camp, rendered in one furious half-hour into a great expanse of rubbish, scattered across the bare rock and the hard earth. The twisted bodies of men and horses were mixed in with the trampled frames of tents, ripped and dragged out canvas, burst barrels, broken boxes, gear for cooking and mending and fighting, all trodden into the churned mud, stamped with the smeared prints of hooves and boots. In the midst of all this chaos, there were strange islands of calm, where all seemed undisturbed, just as it must have been before West ordered the charge. A pot still hung over a smoldering fire, stew bubbling inside. A set of spears were neatly stacked against each other, with stool and whetstone beside, ready to be sharpened. 3 bedrolls formed a perfect triangle, blankets well folded at the head of each one, all neat and orderly, except that a man lay sprawled across them, the contents of his gaping skull splattered across the pale wool. Not far beyond a Union officer knelt in the mud, cradling another in his arms. West felt a sick twinge of recognition. The one on his knees was his old friend Lieutenant Brint. The one lying limp was his old friend Lieutenant Casper. For some reason, West felt an almost overpowering urge to walk away, off up the slope without stopping, and pretend not to have seen them. He had to force himself to stride over, his mouth filling with sour spit. Brint looked up, pale face streaked with tears. "An arrow," he whispered. "Just a stray. He never even drew his sword." "Bad luck," grunted Pike. "Bad luck." West stared down. Bad luck indeed. He could just see, snapped off at the edge of Casper's beard, under his jaw, the broken shaft of an arrow, but there was surprisingly little blood, few marks of any kind, a splatter of mud down one sleeve of his uniform, and that was all. Despite the fact they were, in essence, staring cross-eyed at nothing, West could not help the feeling that Casper's eyes were looking directly into his. There was a peevish twist to his lip, an accusatory wrinkling of his brows. West almost wanted to take him up on it, demand to know what he meant by it, then had to remind himself that the man was dead. "A letter, then," muttered West, his fingers fussing with each other. "To his family." Brint gave a miserable sniff, which West found, for some reason, utterly infuriating. "Yes, a letter. Yes, Sergeant Pike with me." West could not stand there a moment longer. He turned away from his friends, one living and one dead, and strode off up the valley. He did his very best not to dwell on the fact that, had he not ordered the charge, one of the most pleasant and inoffensive men of his acquaintance would still be alive. One cannot be a leader without a certain ruthlessness, perhaps. But ruthlessness is not always easy. He and Pike floundered over a crushed earth rampart and a trampled ditch, the valley growing steadily narrower, the high cliffs of stone pressing in on either side. Northmen, and wild men such as they found in Dunrek, and Shanka too, all peppered liberally across the broken ground. West could see the wall of the fortress now, little more than a mossy hump in the landscape with more death scattered round its foot. "They held out in there for 7 days, muttered Pike. "So it would seem." The one entrance was a rough archway in the center of the wall, its gates torn off and lying ruined. There seemed to be 3 strange shapes within it. As he got closer, West realized with some discomfort what they were. 3 men, hanging dead by their necks from ropes over the top of the wall, their limp boots swinging gently at about chest height. There were a lot of grim Northmen gathered around that gate, looking up at those dangling corpses with some satisfaction. One in particular turned a cruel grin on West and Pike as they came close. "Well, well, well, if it ain't my old friend Furious," said Black Dow. "Turned up late to the party, eh? You always was a slow mover, lad. There were some difficulties. Marshal Burr is dead. Back to the mud, eh? Well, he is in good company at least. Plenty of good men done that these past days. Who's your chief now?" West took a long breath. "I am," Dow laughed. And West watched him laugh, feeling the slightest bit sick. "Big Chief Furious, what do you know?" And he stood up straight and made a mockery of a Union salute while the bodies turned slowly this way and that behind him. "You should meet my friends. They're all big men, too. This here is Crendel Goring, fought for Bethod from way back." And he reached up and gave one of the bodies a shove, watched it sway back and forth. "This here is Whitesides, and you couldn't have found a better man anywhere for killing folk and stealing their land." And he gave the next a push and set it spinning round and round one way, then back the other, limbs all limp and floppy. "And this one here is Littlebone. As hard a bastard as I've ever hung. This last man was hacked near to meat, his gold-chased armor battered and dented, a great wound across his chest and his hanging gray hair thick with blood. One leg was off below his knee, and a pool of dry blood stained the ground underneath him." "What happened to him?" asked West. "To Littlebone? The great fat hillman Crummock-eye Fail was one of the crowd. He got cut down in the battle, fighting to the last man, over yonder, that he did," said Dow, and he gave West a grin even bigger than usual. "But that's no kind of a reason not to hang him now, I reckon," Crummock laughed. "No kind of a reason." And he smiled at the 3 bodies turning round and round, the ropes creaking. "They make a pretty picture, don't they, hanging there? They say you can see all the beauty in the world in the way a hanged man swings." "Who does?" asked West. Crummock shrugged his great shoulders. Them, eh? West swallowed his nausea and pushed his way between the hanging bodies into the fortress. They surely are a bloodthirsty crowd. Dogman took another pull at the flask. He was getting good and drunk now. All right, let's get it done then. He winced as Grim stuck the needle in, curled his lips back and hissed through his teeth, a nice pricking and niggling to add to the dull throb. The needle went through the skin and dragged the thread after, and Dogman's arm started burning worse and worse. He took another swig, rocking back and forward. But it didn't help. Shit, he hissed. Shit! Grim looked up at him. Don't watch then. Dogman turned his head. The Union uniform jumped out at him straight away, red cloth in the midst of all that brown dirt. Furious, shouted the Dogman, feeling a grin on his face even through the pain. Glad you could make it. Real glad. Better to come late than not to come at all. You'll get no trace of an argument from me. That is a fact. West frowned down at Grim, sewing his arm up. You all right? Well, you know. Tull's dead. Dead? West stared at him. How? It's a battle, ain't it? Dead men are the point of the fucking exercise. He waved the flask around. I've been sat here, thinking about what I could have done differently. Stopped him going down them steps. Or gone down with him to watch his back, or made the sky fall in. Or all kind of stupid notions, none of 'em any help to the dead nor the living. Seems I can stop thinking, though. West frowned down at the rutted earth. Might be's a game with no winners. Ah, fuck. Dogman snarled as the needle jabbed into his arm again, and he flung the empty flask, bouncing away. The whole fucking business has no winners, though, does it? Shit on it all, I say. Grim pulled his knife out and cut the thread. Move your fingers. It burned all the way up Dogman's arm to make a fist, but he forced the fingers closed, growling at the pain as they bunched up tight. Looks all right, said Grim. You're lucky. The Dogman stared round miserably at the carnage. So this is what luck looks like, is it? I've often wondered. Grim shrugged his shoulders, ripped a piece of cloth for a bandage. Do you have Bethod? Dogman looked up at West, his mouth open. Don't you? A lot of prisoners, but he wasn't among them. Dogman turned his head and spat his disgust out into the mud. Nor his witch, nor his feared, nor neither one of his swollen-up sons, I'll be bound. I imagine they'll be riding for Carleon as swiftly as possible. More'n likely. I imagine he'll try to raise new forces, to find new allies, to prepare for a siege. I shouldn't wonder. We should follow him as soon as the prisoners are secure. Dogman felt a sudden wave of hopelessness, enough almost to knock him over. By the dead, Bethod got away. He laughed, and felt tears prickling his eyes the next moment. Will there ever be an end to it? Grim finished wrapping the bandage and tied it up tight. You're done. Dogman stared back at him. Done? Dogman stared back at him. I'm starting to think I won't ever be done. He held his hand out. Help me up, furious. I got a friend to bury. The sun was getting low when they put Tull in the ground, just peering over the tops of the mountains and touching the edges of the clouds with gold. Good weather to bury a good man. They stood round the grave, all packed in tight. There were plenty of others being buried. The sad words for them wept and whispered all around. But Tull had been well loved, no man more. So there was quite the crowd. Even so, all round Logen, there was a gap, an empty space a man wide. That space he used to have around him in the old days, where no one would dare to stand. Logen hardly blamed them. He'd have run away himself if he could. Who wants to speak? Asked the Dogman, looking at them, one by one. Logen stared down at his feet, not even able to meet his eye, let alone say a word. He wasn't sure what had happened in the battle, but he could guess. But he could guess. He could guess well enough from the bits he did remember. He glanced around, licking at his split lips, but if anyone else guessed, they kept it to themselves. No one going to say a word? Asked Dogman again, his voice cracking. Guess it best be fucking me then, eh? And Black Dow stepped forward. He took a long look round at the gathering. Took a long look at Logen in particular, it seemed to him. But that was most likely just his own worries playing tricks. Tul Duru Thunderhead, said Dow. Back to the mud. The dead know we didn't always see things the same way, me and him. didn't often agree on nothing, but maybe that was my fault, as I'm a contrary bastard at the best of times. I regret it now, I reckon. Now it's too late. He took a ragged breath. Tulduru. Every man in the north knew his name, and every man said it with respect. Even his enemies. He was the sort of man that gave you hope, I reckon. That gave you hope. You want strength, do you? You want courage? You want things done right and proper the old way? He nodded down at the new-turned earth. There you go. Tulduru. Thunderhead. Look no fucking further. I'm less now that he's gone, and so are all o' you. And Dow turned and stalked off away from the grave and into the dusk, his head down. We're all less, muttered Dogman, staring down at the earth with the glimmer of a tear in his eye. Good words. They all looked broken up. Every one of them stood around the grave. West and his men, Pike and Shivers and even Grim, all broken up. Logen wanted to feel as they did. He wanted to weep for the death of a good man, for the fact that he might have been the one to cause it. But the tears wouldn't come. He frowned down at the fresh-turned earth as the sun sank behind the mountains, and the fortress in the high places grew dark, and he felt less than nothing. If you want to be a new man, you have to stay in new places and do new things, with people who never knew you before. If you go back to the same old ways, what else can you be but the same old person? You have to be realistic. He'd played at being a different man, but it had all been lies. The hardest kind to see through. The kind you tell yourself. He was the Bloody Nine. That was the fact. And however he twisted and squirmed and wished to be someone else, there was no escaping it. Logen wanted to care, but the Bloody Nine cares for nothing. Chapter 30. Rude Awakenings. Jezal was smiling when he began to wake. They were done with this madcap mission, and soon he would be back in Adua, back in Ardi's arms, warm and safe. He snuggled down into his blankets at the thought. Then he frowned. There was a knocking sound coming from somewhere. He opened his eyes a crack. Someone hissed at him from across the room, and he turned his head. He saw Therese's face, pale in the darkness, glaring from between the bed curtains, and the last few weeks came back in a horrible rush. She looked just as she had the day he married her, surely, and yet the perfect face of his queen seemed now ugly and hateful to him. The royal bedchamber had become a battlefield. The border, watched with iron determination, was an invisible line between door and fireplace, which Jezal crossed at his peril. The far side of the room was Styrian territory, and the mighty bed itself was Therese's strongest citadel, its defenses apparently impregnable. On the second night of their marriage, hoping perhaps that there had been some misunderstanding on the first, he had mounted a half-hearted assault which had left him with a bloody nose. Since then, he had settled in hopelessly for a long and fruitless siege. Therese was the very mistress of deception. He would sleep on the floor or on some item of furniture never quite long enough, or wherever he pleased as long as it was not with her. Then at breakfast, she would smile at him and speak of nothing, sometimes even place her hand fondly on his when she knew they were being watched. Occasionally, she would even have him believing that all was now well, but as soon as they were alone, she would turn her back on him and bludgeon him with silence and stab him with looks of such epic scorn and disgust that he wanted to be sick. Her ladies-in-waiting behaved towards him with scarcely less contempt whenever he had the misfortune to find himself in their whispering presence. One in particular, the Countess Shaler, apparently his wife's closest friend since a tender age, eyed him always with a murderous hatred. On one occasion he had blundered into the salon, where all dozen of them were sitting, arranged around Therese, muttering in Styrian. He had felt like a peasant boy stumbling upon a coven of extremely well-presented witches, chanting some dark curse, probably one directed towards himself. He was made to feel like the lowest, most repulsive animal alive, and he was a king in his own palace. For some reason he lived in inexplicable horror that somebody would realize the truth, but if any of the servants noticed, they kept it to themselves. He wondered if he should have told someone, but who? And what? Lord Chamberlain, good day. My wife refuses to fuck me. Your Eminence, well met. My wife will not look at me. High Justice, how are you? The Queen despises me, by the way. Most of all, he feared telling Bayaz. He had warned the Magus away from his personal affairs in no uncertain terms, and could scarcely go crawling for his help now. And so he went along with the fiction, miserable and confused, and with every day that he pretended at marital bliss, it became more and more impossible to see his way clear of it. His whole life stretched away before him, loveless, friendless, and sleeping on the floor. "Well," hissed Therese. "Well, what?" he snarled back. "The door!" As if on cue, there was a brutal banging at the door, making it rattle in its frame. "Nothing good ever comes from Talons," Jezal whispered under his breath, as he flung back his blankets and struggled up from the carpet, stumbled angrily across the room and turned the key in the lock. Gore stood in the hallway outside, clad in full armor, and with his sword drawn, a lantern held up in one hand, harsh light across one side of his heavy, worried face. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of echoing footsteps, of confused shouting, the flickering of distant lamps. The Gurkish have invaded Midderland. Pharaoh's eyes snapped open. She sprang up from the settle, her feet planted wide in a fighting stance, the torn-off table leg gripped tight in her fist. She cursed under her breath. She had fallen asleep, and nothing good ever happened when she did that. But there was no one in the room, all dark and silent. No sign of the cripple or his black-masked servants. No sign of the armored guards who watched her through narrowed eyes whenever she took a step down the tiled halls of this cursed place. Only the slightest chink of light under the paneled door that led through to Bayaz's room. That and a quiet murmuring of voices. She frowned and padded over, kneeling silently beside the keyhole. "Where have they landed?" Bayaz's voice muffled through the wood. Their first boats came ashore in the gray dusk, on the empty beaches at the southwestern tip of Midderland, near to Caln-Uy. Pharaoh felt a tingling thrill, her breath coming fast and cold in her nostrils. "Are you prepared?" Bayaz snorted. "We could scarcely be less so. I was not expecting Khalul to move so soon or so suddenly. They landed in the night, unannounced. Did Lord Brock not see them come? My guess is that he saw them all too well and welcomed them by previous arrangement. No doubt he has been promised the throne of the Union, once the Gurkish have crushed all resistance and hung your bastard from the gates of the Agrient. He will be king subject to the might of Uthman ul-Dosht, of course." She heard Yulway sigh. "I never denied it. How many Gurkish? They never come in ones and twos. 5 legions perhaps so far, but they are only the vanguard. Many more are coming. Thousands, the whole south moves to war. Is Khalul with them? Why would he be? He stays in Sarkant, in his sunny gardens upon the mountain terraces, and waits for news of your destruction. Mamun leads them, fruit of the desert, thrice blessed and thrice. I know the names he calls himself, the arrogant worm. Whatever he calls himself, he has grown strong, and the 100 words are with him. They are here for you, brother. They are come. If I walked in your footsteps, I would be away. Away to the cold north, while there is still time. And then what? Will they not follow me? Should I flee to the edge of the world? I was there, not long ago, and it holds little appeal. I have yet a few cards left to play." A long pause. "You found the seed?" "No." Another pause. "I am not sorry to tinker with those forces to bend the first law if not to break it. The last time that thing was used it made a ruin of Alcus and came near to making a ruin of the whole world. It is better left buried, even if our hopes are buried with it. There are greater things at risk than my hopes or yours." Pharaoh did not care a shit for Bayaz's hopes, or Yulwai's either, if it came to that. They had both deceived her. She had swallowed a bellyful of their lies, and their secrets, and their promises. She had done nothing but talk, and wait, and talk again for far too long. She stood up and lifted her leg and gave a fighting scream. Her heel caught the lock and tore it from the frame, sent the door shuddering open. The 2 old men sat at a table nearby, a single lamp throwing light over the dark face and the pale. A third figure sat in the shadows of the far corner, Quay, silent and sunk in darkness. "Could you not have knocked?" asked Bayaz. Yulwai's smile was a bright curve in his dark skin. "Pharaoh, it is good to see you still. When are the Gurkish coming?" His grin faded, and he gave a long sigh. "I see that you have not learned patience. I learnt it, then ran out of it. When are they coming? Soon. Their scouts are already moving through the countryside of Midderland, taking the villages and laying the fortresses under siege. making the country safe for the rest who will come behind. Someone should stop them, muttered Pharaoh, her nails digging into her palms. Bayaz sat back in his chair, the shadows collecting in his craggy face. You speak my very thoughts. Your luck has changed, Pharaoh? I promised you vengeance, and now it drops ripe and bloody into your lap. Uthman's army has landed, thousands of Gurkish, and ready for war. They might be at the city gates within 2 weeks. 2 weeks, whispered Pharaoh. But I have no doubt some Union soldiers will be going out to greet them sooner. I could find you a place with them if you cannot wait. She had waited long enough. Thousands of Gurkish, and ready for war. The smile tugged at one corner of Pharaoh's mouth, then grew and grew until her cheeks were aching. Chapter 31, Number of the Dead. It was quiet in the village. It was quiet in the village. The few houses, built from old stone with roofs of mossy slate, seemed deserted. The only life in the fields beyond, mostly fresh harvested and plowed over, were a handful of miserable crows. Next to Pharaoh, the bell in the tower creaked softly. Some loose shutters on a window swung and tapped. A few curled-up leaves fell on a gust of wind and fluttered gently to the empty square. On the horizon, 3 columns of dark smoke rose up just as gently into the heavy sky. The Gurkish were coming, and they always had loved to burn. Malgin, Major Valamir was below, framed by the trapdoor, and Pharaoh scowled down. He reminded her of Jezal Dan Luthar when she had first met him, a plump, pale face stuffed with that infuriating mixture of panic and arrogance. It was plain enough that he had never set an ambush for a goat before, let alone for Gurkish scouts, but still he pretended he knew best. "Do you see anything?" he hissed at her, for the 5th time in an hour. "I see them coming," Pharaoh growled back. "How many?" "Still a dozen." "How far off?" "Perhaps 1/4 of an hour's ride now, and your asking will not make them come quicker. When they are in the square, I will give the signal with 2 claps. Make sure you do not miss one hand with the other pink." "I told you not to call me that." A brief pause. "We must take one of them alive to question." Pharaoh wrinkled her nose. Her taste did not lean towards taking Gurkish alive. "We will see." She turned back to the horizon, and soon enough she heard the sound of Valamir whispering orders to some of his men. The rest were scattered around the other buildings, hiding. An odd crowd of leftover soldiers. A few were veterans, but most of them were even younger and more twitchy than Valamir himself. Pharaoh wished, and not for the first time, that they had 9 fingers with them. Like him or not, no one could have denied that the man knew his business. With him, Pharaoh had known what she would get. Solid experience, or on occasion, murderous fury. Either one would have been useful. But 9 fingers was not there, so Pharaoh stood in the wide window of the bell tower, alone, frowning out across the rolling fields of Midderland, and watched the riders come closer. A dozen Gurkish scouts trotting in a loose group down a track, wriggling specks on a pale streak between patchworks of dark earth. They slowed as they passed the first wood-built barn, spreading out. A great Gurkish host would number soldiers from all across the empire. Fighters from a score of different conquered provinces. These 12 scouts were Kadiris, by their long faces and narrow eyes, their saddlebags of patterned cloth, lightly armed with bows and spears. Killing them would not be much vengeance, but it would be some. It would fill the space for now. It would fill the space for now. A space that had been empty far too long. One of them startled as a crow flapped up from a scraggy tree. Pharaoh held her breath, sure that Valamir or one of his blundering pinks would choose that moment to trip over one another. But there was only silence as the horsemen eased carefully into the village square, their leader with one hand raised for caution. He looked right up at her, but saw nothing. Arrogant fools. They saw only what they wanted to see. A village from which everyone had fled, crushed with fear of the Emperor's matchless army. Her fist clenched tight around her bow. They would learn. She would teach them. The leader had a square of floppy paper out in his hands, peering at it as though it was a message in a language he did not understand. A map, maybe. One of his men reined his horse in and slid from the saddle, took its bridle and led it towards a mossy trough. 2 more sat loose on their mounts, talking and grinning, moving their hands, telling jokes. A 4th cleaned his fingernails with a knife, Another rode slowly round the edge of the square, leaning from his saddle and peering in through the windows of the houses, looking for something to steal. One of the joke-tellers burst into a deep peal of laughter. Then 2 sharp claps echoed from the buildings. The scout by the trough was just filling his flask when Pharaoh's shaft sank into his chest. The canteen tumbled from his hand, shining drops spilling from the neck. Flatbows rattled in the windows. Scouts yelled and stared. One horse stumbled sideways and fell, puffs of dust rising from its flailing hooves, crushing its rider screaming underneath it. Union soldiers charged from the buildings, shouting, "Spears ready!" One of the riders had his sword half drawn when he was nailed with a flatbow bolt, and fell lolling from the saddle. Pharaoh's second arrow took another in the back. The one who had been picking his fingernails was dumped from his horse, stumbled up in time to see a Union soldier coming at him with a spear. He threw down his knife and held his arms up too late, was run through anyway, the spear point sticking bloody out of his back as he fell. 2 of them made a dash the way they had come. Pharaoh took aim at one, but as they reached the narrow lane, a rope was pulled tight across the gap. The pair of them were snatched from their saddles, dragging a Union soldier yelping from a building, bouncing along a few strides on his face, rope stuck tight round his arm. One of Pharaoh's arrows caught a scout between his shoulder blades as he tried to push himself up from the dust. The other dragged himself a groggy few strides before a Union soldier hit him in the head with a sword and left the back of his skull hanging off. Of the dozen, only the leader got away from the village. He spurred his horse for a narrow fence between 2 buildings, jumping it with hooves clattering against the top rail. He galloped off across the coarse stubble of a harvested field, pressed low into his saddle, jerking his heels into his horse's flanks. Pharaoh took a long, slow aim, feeling the smile tugging at the corners of her face. All in a moment she judged the way he was sitting in the saddle. The speed of the horse, the height of the tower, felt the wind on her face, the weight of the shaft, the tension in the wood, the string biting into her lip. She watched the arrow fly, a spinning black splinter against the gray sky, and the horse rushed forwards to meet it. Sometimes God is generous. The leader arched his back and tumbled from the saddle, rolling over and over on the dusty earth, specks of mud and cut stalks flying up around him. His cry of agony came to Pharaoh's ear a moment later. Her lips curled back further from her teeth. "Ha!" She threw the bow over her shoulder, slid down the ladder, vaulted through the back window and dashed out across the field. Her boots thudded in the soft soil between the clumps of stubble. Her hand tightened around the grip of her sword. The man mewled in the dirt as he tried to drag himself towards his horse. He got one desperate finger hooked over the stirrup as he heard Pharaoh's quick footsteps behind, but fell back with a squeal when he tried to lift himself. He lay on his side as she ran up, the blade hissing angry from its wooden sheath. His eyes rolled towards her, wild with pain and fear, a dark face, like her own. An unexceptional face of 40 years old, with a patchy beard and a pale birthmark on one cheek. Dust caked to the other, beads of shining sweat across his forehead. She stood over him, and sunlight glinted on the edge of the curved sword. "Give me a reason not to do it," she found she had said. Strange that she had said it, and to a soldier in the Emperor's army of all people. In the heat and dust of the Badlands of Kanta, she had not been in the habit of offering chances. Perhaps something had changed in her, out there in the wet and ruined west of the world. He stared up for a moment, his lip trembling. "Aye," he croaked. "My daughters. I have 2 daughters. I pray to see them married." Pharaoh frowned. She should not have let him start talking. A father with daughters, just as she had once had a father been a daughter. This man had done her no harm. He was no more Gurkish than she was. He had not chosen to fight, most likely, or had any choice but to do as the mighty Uthman-ul-Dasht commanded. "I will go. I swear to God I will go back to my wife and my daughters." The arrow had taken him just under the shoulder and gone clean through, snapped off when he hit the ground. She could see the splintered shaft under his arm. It had missed his lung by the way he was talking. It would not kill him. Not right away, at least. Pharaoh could help him onto his horse and he would be gone with a chance to live. The scout held up a trembling hand, a spatter of blood on his long thumb. "Please, this is not my war, The sword carved a deep wound out of his face, through his mouth, splitting his lower jaw apart. He made a hissing moan. The next blow cut his head half off. He rolled over, dark blood pouring out into the dark earth, clutching at the stubble of the shorn crop. The sword broke the back of his skull open, and he was still. It seemed that Pharaoh was not in a merciful mood that day. The butchered scout's horse stared dumbly at her. What? She snapped. Perhaps she had changed out there in the west, but no one changes that much. One less soldier in Uthman's army was a good thing, wherever he came from. She had no need to make excuses for herself, especially not to a horse. She grabbed at its bridle and gave it a yank. Valimir might have been a pink fool, but Pharaoh had to admit that he had managed the ambush well. 10 scouts lay dead in the village square, their torn clothes flapping in the breeze, their blood smeared across the dusty ground. The only Union casualty was the idiot who had been jerked over by his own rope, covered in dust and scratches. A good day's work so far. A soldier poked at one of the corpses with his boot. So this is what the Gurkish look like, eh? Not so fearsome now. These are not Gurkish, said Pharaoh. Kadiri scouts, pressed into service. They did not want to be here any more than you wanted them here. The man stared back at her, puzzled and annoyed. Kanta is full of people. Not everyone with a brown face is Gurkish, or prays to their god, or bows to their emperor. Most do. Most have no choice. They're still the enemy, he sneered. I did not say we should spare them, she shouldered past, back through the door into the building with the bell tower. It seemed Valimir had managed to take a prisoner after all. He and some others were clustered nervously around one of the scouts, on his knees with his arms bound tightly behind him. He had a bloody graze down one side of his face, staring up with that look that prisoners tend to have. Scared. Where is your main body? Valimir was demanding. He does not speak your tongue, Pink, snapped Pharaoh, and shouting it will not help. Valimir looked angrily round at her. Perhaps we should have brought someone with us who speaks Kantic, he said with heavy irony. Perhaps. There was a long pause, while Valimir waited for her to say more, but she said nothing. Eventually he gave a long sigh. Do you speak Kantic? Of course. Then would you be so kind as to ask him some questions for us? Pharaoh sucked her teeth. A waste of her time, but if it had to be done, it was best done quickly. What shall I ask him? Well, how far away the Gurkish army is, how many are in it, what route they are taking, Huh? Pharaoh squatted down in front of the prisoner and looked him squarely in the eyes. He stared back, helpless and frightened, no doubt wondering what she was doing with these pinks. She wondered herself. Who are you? He whispered. She drew her knife and held it up. You will answer my questions, or I will kill you with this knife. That is who I am. Where is the Gurkish army? He licked his lips. Perhaps 2 days' march away to the south. How many? More than I could count. Many thousands. People of the deserts and the plains. And what route are they taking? I do not know. We were only told to ride to this village and see whether it was empty. He swallowed, the lump on the front of his sweaty throat bobbing up and down. Perhaps my captain knows more. Ses est Pharaoh. His captain would be telling nobody anything now she had carved up his head. A lot of them, she snapped at Valimir, in common, and many more to come. 2 days' march behind. He does not know their route. What now? Valimir rubbed at the light stubble on his jaw. I suppose we should take him back to the Agrient. Deliver him to the Inquisition. He knows nothing. He will only slow us down. We should kill him. He surrendered. To kill him would be no better than murder, war, or no war. Valimir beckoned to one of the soldiers. I won't have that on my conscience. I will. Pharaoh's knife slid smoothly into the scout's heart and out. His mouth and his eyes opened up very wide. Blood bubbled through the split cloth on his chest, spread out quickly in a dark ring. He gawped at it, making a long sucking sound. Gluff! His head dropped back, his body sagged. She turned to see the soldiers staring at her, pale faces puffed up with shock. A busy day for them, maybe, a lot to learn. But they would soon get used to it. That, or the Gurkish would kill them. They want to burn your farms and your towns and your cities. They want to make slaves of your children. They want everyone in the world to pray to God in the same way they do. with the same words they use, and for your land to be a province of their empire. I know this. Pharaoh wiped the blade of her knife on the sleeve of the dead man's tunic. The only difference between war and murder is the number of the dead. Valimir stared down at the corpse of his prisoner for a moment, his lips thoughtfully pursed. Pharaoh wondered if he had more backbone than she had given him credit for. Finally, he turned towards her. What do you suggest? We could wait for more here. Perhaps even get some real Gurkish this time. But that might mean too many for we few. So, east or north, and set another trap like this one, and defeat the Emperor's army 12 men at a time. Small steps. Pharaoh shrugged. Small steps in the right direction. Unless you've seen enough and want to go back to your walls. Valimir gave her a long frown. Then he turned to one of his men, a heavy-built veteran with a scar on his cheek. There is a village just east of here, is there not, Sergeant Forrest? Yes, sir. Marlhof is no more than 10 miles distant. Will that suit you? Asked Valimir, raising one eyebrow at Pharaoh. Dead Gurkish suit me. That is all. Chapter 32. Leaves on the Water, Carleon, said Logen. Aye, said Dogman. It squatted there in the fork of the river, under the brooding clouds. Hard shapes of tall walls and towers on the sheer bluff, above the fast-flowing water. Up where Scarling's Hall used to stand, slate roofs and stone buildings squashed in tight on the long downward slope. Clustered in round the foot of the hill, and with another wall outside, everything lent a cold, sharp shine from the rain just finished falling. Dogman couldn't say he was glad to see the place again. Every visit yet had turned out badly. It's changed some, since the battle. All them years ago. Logen was looking down at his spread-out hand, waggling the stump of his missing finger. There weren't no walls like that round it then. No. But there weren't no Union army round it neither. Dogman couldn't deny it was a comforting fact. The Union pickets worked their way through the empty fields about the city, a wobbly line of earthworks and stakes and fences, with men moving behind them, dull sunlight catching metal now and then. Thousands of men, well-armed and vengeful, keeping Bethod penned up. You sure he's in there? Don't see where else he's got to go. He lost most of his best boys up in the mountains. No friends left, I reckon. We've all got less than we used to, Dogman muttered. I guess we just sit here. We got time after all. Lots of it. But just giving up didn't sound much like the Bethod he knew. He turned his head at the sound of hooves fast on the road, saw one of those messengers with a helmet like an angry chicken race from the trees and towards West's tent, horse well lathered from hard riding. He reined up in a fumbling hurry, near fell out of his saddle in his rush to get down, wobbled past a few staring officers and in through the flap. Dogman felt that familiar weight of worry in his gut. That's got the taste o' bad news. What other kind is there? There was some flutter down there now, soldiers shouting, throwing their arms around. Best go and see what's happened, muttered Dogman, though he'd much rather have walked the other way. Crummock was stood near the tent, frowning at the commotion. Something's up, said the hillman, but I don't understand a thing these southerners say or do. I swear they're all mad. Mad chatter came surging out of that tent all right, when Dogman pushed back the flap. There were Union officers all around the place, and in a bastard of a muddle. West was in the midst of it, face pale as fresh milk, his fists clenched tight around nothing. Furious. Dogman grabbed him by the arm. What the hell's happening? The Gurkish have invaded Mitterland. West pulled his arm free and took to shouting. The who have done what now? Muttered Crummock. The Gurkish. Logen was frowning deep. Brown folk from way down south. Hard folk, by all accounts. Pike had come up now, his burned face grim. They landed an army by sea. They might have reached Adua already. Hold on now. Dogman didn't know a thing about Gurkish or Adua or Mitterland, but his bad feeling was getting worse every moment. What are you telling us exactly? We've been ordered home. Now, Dogman stared. He should have known all along it couldn't be this simple. He grabbed West by the arm again, stabbing down towards Carleon with his dirty finger. We've nothing like the men we need to carry on a siege of this place without you. I know, said West, and I'm sorry. But there's nothing I can do. Get over to General Polder. He snapped at a young lad with a squint. Tell him to get his division ready to march for the coast at once. Dogman blinked, feeling sick to his stomach. So we fought 7 days in the high places for nothing? No, we fought 7 days in the high places, for nothing. Tool died, and the dead know how many more, for nothing. It always took him by surprise, how fast something could fall apart once you were leaning on it. That's it then. Back to woods and cold and running and killing. No end to it. Might be another way, said Crummock. What way? The chief of the hillmen had a sly grin. You know, don't you, Blood-a-nine? Aye, I know. Logen had a look like a man who knows he's about to hang, and he's staring at the tree they're going to do it from. When have you got to leave? Furious. West frowned. We have a lot of men and not a lot of road. Polder's division tomorrow, I imagine. And Croy's the day after. Crummock's grin got a shade wider. So all day tomorrow there'll be piles of men sat here, dug in round Bethod, looking like they're never going nowhere, eh? I suppose there could be. Give me tomorrow, said Logen. Give me just that, and maybe I can settle things. Then I'll come south with you if I'm still alive and bring who I can. That's my word, we'll help you with the Gurkish. What difference can one day make? Asked West. Aye, muttered Dogman. What's one day? Trouble was, he could already guess the answer. Water trickled under the old bridge, past the trees and off down the green hillside, down towards Carleon. Logen watched a few yellow leaves carried on it, turning round and round, dragged past the mossy stones. He wished that he could just float away, but it didn't seem likely. We fought here, said the Dogman. 3 trees and tall, Dow and Grim and me. Forley's buried in them woods somewhere. You want to go up there? Asked Logen. Give him a visit, see if. What for? I doubt a visit'll do me any good, and I'm damn sure it won't do him any. Nothing will. That's what it is to be dead. You sure about this, Logen? You see another way? The Union won't stick. Might be our last chance to finish with Bethod. Not that much to lose, is there? There's your life. Logen took a long breath. Can't think of too many people who place much value on that. You coming down? Dogman shook his head. Reckon I'll stay up here. I had a belly full of Bethod. All right then, all right. It was as if all the moments of Logen's life, things said and things done, choices he hardly remembered making, had led him to this. Now there was no choice at all. Maybe there never had been. He was like the leaves on the water carried along, down towards Carleon, and nothing he could do about it. He gave his heels to his horse, and off down the slope, alone, down the dirt track, beside the gurgling stream. Everything seemed picked out clearer than usual. As the day wore down, he rode past trees, damp leaves getting ready to fall golden yellow, burning orange, vivid purple, all the colors of fire, down towards the valley bottom through the heavy air, just a trace of autumn mist to it, sharp in his throat. The sounds of saddle creaking, harness rattling, hoofbeats in the soft ground all came muffled. He trotted through the empty fields, turned mud pocked with weeds, past the Union pickets, a ditch and a line of sharpened stakes, 3 times bowshot from the walls, soldiers there, in studded jackets and steel caps, watched him pass with frowns on their faces. He pulled on the reins and slowed his horse to a walk. He clattered over a wooden bridge, one of Bethod's new ones, the river underneath surging with the autumn rain. Up the gentle rise, the wall looming over him. High, sheer, dark, and solid-looking, a threatening piece of wall if ever there had been one. He couldn't see men at the slots and the battlements, but he guessed they had to be there. He swallowed, spit moving awkward in his throat, then made himself sit up tall, pretending he wasn't cut and aching all over from 7 days of battle in the mountains. He wondered if he was about to hear a flatbow click, feel the stab of pain, then drop into the mud, dead. Some kind of an embarrassing song that would make. Well, 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 came a deep voice, and Logen knew it right away. Who else would it be but Bethod? The strange thing was that he was glad to hear it, for the quickest moment, until he remembered all the blood between them. Until he remembered they hated each other. You can have enemies you never really meet. Logen had plenty. You can kill men you don't know. He'd done it often. But you can't truly hate a man without loving him first, and there's always a trace of that love left over. I'm taking a look down from my gates, and who should ride up out of the past? Bethod called to him. The bloody 9. Would you believe it? I'd organize a feast, but we've no food to spare in here. He stood there, at the parapet, high up above the doors, fists on the stone. He didn't sneer. He didn't smile. He didn't do much of anything. If it ain't the king of the Northmen, Logen shouted up. Still got your golden hat, then? Bethod touched the ring round his head, the big jewel on his brow glittering with the setting sun. Why wouldn't I have? Let me see. Logen looked left and right, up and down the bare walls. Just that you've got shit all left to be king of, far as I can tell. I reckon we're both feeling lonely. Where are your friends, Bloody Nine? Those killers you liked around you. Where's the Thunderhead and Grim and the Dogman and the bastard Black Dow? All done with, Bethod. Up in the mountains, dead as Scarling. Them and Littlebone, and Goring, and Whitesides, and plenty more besides. Bethod looked grim at that. Not much to cheer about, if you're asking me. That's some useful men gone back to the mud, one way or another. Some friends of mine and some of yours. There never is a happy outcome with we two, is there? Bad as friends, and worse as enemies. What did you come here for, Nine Fingers? Logen sat there for a moment, thinking of all the other times he'd done what he had to do now. The challenges had made and their outcomes, and there were no happy memories among that lot. Say one thing for Logen and Fingers, say he's reluctant. But there was no other way. I'm here to make a challenge, he bellowed, and the sound of it echoed back from the damp, dark walls, and died a slow death in the misty air. Bethod tipped back his head and laughed, a laugh without much joy in it, Logen reckoned. By the dead, Nine Fingers, but you never change. You're like some old dog no one can stop from barking. Challenge? What have we got left to fight over? I win. You open the gates and belong to me, my prisoner. I lose. The Union pack up and sail for home, and you're free. Bethod's smile slowly faded, and his eyes narrowed, suspicious. Logen knew that look from way back, turning over the chances, sorting through the reasons why. That sounds like a golden offer, considering the fix I'm in. Hard to believe it. What's in it for your southern friends up there? Logen snorted. They'll wait if they have to. But they don't much care about you, Bethod. You're nothing to them, for all your bluster. They kicked your arse across the north already, and they reckon you'll not be bothering them again either way. If I win, they get your head. If I lose, they can go home early. I'm nothing to them, eh? Bethod split a sad smile. Is that what it's come to after all my work and sweat and pain? Are you happy, Nine Fingers, to see all I've fought for put in the dust? Why shouldn't I be? You've no one but yourself to blame for it. It was you brought us to this. Take my challenge, Bethod, then maybe one of us can have peace. The king of the Northmen gaped down, eyes wide. No one else to blame. Me? How soon we all forget. He grabbed the chain around his shoulders and rattled it. You think I wanted this? You think I asked for any of it? All I wanted was a strip more land to feed my people, to stop the big clans squeezing me. All I wanted was to win a few victories to be proud of, to pass on something better to my sons than I got from my father. He leaned forward, his hands clutching at the battlements. Who was it always had to push a step further? Who was it would never let me stop? Who was it had to taste blood, and once he'd tasted it got drunk on it, went mad with it, could never get enough? His finger stabbed down. Who else but the Bloody Nine? That's not how it was, growled Logen. Bethod's laughter echoed harsh on the wind. Is it not? I wanted to talk with Shama Heartless, but you had to kill him. I tried to strike a deal at Heonan, but you had to climb up and settle your score, and start a dozen more. Peace, you say? I begged you to let me make peace at Uafrith, but you had to fight 3 trees. On my knees I begged you, but you had to have the biggest name in all the north. Then once you'd beaten him, you broke your word to me and let him live, as though there was nothing bigger to think about than your damn pride. That's not how it was, said Logen. There's not a man in the north that doesn't know the truth of it. Peace? What about Rattleneck, eh? I would have ransomed his son back to him, and we could all have gone home happy. But no. What did you say to me? Easier to stop the white flow than to stop the Bloody Nine. Then you had to nail his head to my standard for the whole world to see, so the vengeance would never find an end. Every time I tried to stop, you dragged me on, deeper and deeper, into the mire, until there could be no stopping any longer, until it was kill or be killed, until I had to put down the whole north. You made me king, Nine Fingers. What other choices did you leave me?" "That's not how it was," whispered Logen. But he knew it had been. "Tell yourself that I'm the cause of all your woes if it makes you happy. Tell yourself I'm the merciless one, the murderous one, the bloodthirsty one. But ask yourself who I learned it from. I had the best master." "Play at being the good man if you please, the man with no choices. But we both know what you really are. Peace? You'll never have peace. Bloody Nine, you're made of death. Logen would like to deny it, but it would just have been more lies." Bethod truly knew him. Bethod truly understood him, better than anyone, his worst enemy, and still his best friend. "Then why not kill me when you had the chance?" The king of the Northmen frowned, as though he couldn't understand something. Then he started to laugh again. He shrieked with it. "You don't know why? You stood right beside him and you don't know. You learned nothing from me, Nine Fingers. After all of these years, you still let the rain wash you any way it pleases." "What are you saying?" snarled Logen. Bayaz, Bayaz. What of him?" "I was ready to put the bloody cross in you, sink your carcass in a bog with all the rest of your misfit idiots, and was happy to do it, until that old liar came calling. And I owed him, and he wanted you let go. It was that meddling old fuck that saved your worthless hide and nothing else." "Why?" growled Logen, not knowing what to make of it, but not liking that he was learning about it so long after everyone else. But Bethod only chuckled. "Maybe I didn't grovel low enough for his taste. You're the one he saved. You ask him the whys, if you live long enough. But I don't think you will. I take your challenge. Here, tomorrow. At sunrise." He rubbed his palms together. "Man against man, with the future of the North hanging bloody on the outcome. Just as it used to be, eh, Logen? In the old days? In the sunny valleys of the past. Roll the dice together one more time, shall we?" The king of the Northmen stepped slowly back, away from the battlements. "Some things have changed, though. I've a new champion now. If I was you, I'd say your goodbyes tonight, and get ready for the mud. After all, what was it you used to tell me?" His laughter faded slowly into the dusk. "You have to be realistic. Good piece o' meat," said Grim. A warm fire and a good piece of meat were two things to be thankful for, and there'd been times enough when Dogman had a lot less, but watching the blood drip from that chunk of mutton was making him feel sick. Reminded him of the blood that came out of Shama Heartless when Logen split him open. Years ago, maybe, but the Dogman could see it fresh as yesterday. He could hear the roars from the men, the shields crashing together. He could smell the sour sweat and the fresh blood on the snow. "By the dead," grunted Dogman, mouth watering like he was about to puke. "How can you think about eating now?" Dow gave a toothy grin. "Us going hungry ain't going to help Nine Fingers any. Nothing is. That's the point of a duel, ain't it? All about one man." He poked at the meat with his knife and made the blood run sizzling into the fire. Then he sat back, thoughtful. "You reckon he can do it? Really? You remember that thing?" Dogman felt a ghost of the sick fear he'd had in the mist, and he shuddered to his boots. He weren't likely ever to forget the sight of that giant coming through the murk, the sight of his painted fist rising, the sound of it crunching into Three Trees' ribs, and crushing the life out of him. "If anyone can do it," he growled through his gritted teeth, "I reckon Logen can." Grunted Grim. "Aye, but do you think he will? That's my question. That, and what happens if he don't?" It was a question that Dogman could hardly bear to think up an answer to. Logen would be dead, for a first thing. Then there'd be no siege of Carleon anymore. Dogman had too few men left after the mountains to keep a pisspot surrounded, let alone the best walled city in the north. Bethod could do as he pleased, seek out help, and find new friends, and set to fighting again. There was no one tougher in a tight corner. "Logen can do it," he whispered, bunching his fists and feeling the long cut down his arm burning. "He has to." He nearly fell in the fire when a great fat hand thumped him on the back. "By the dead, but I never seen such a fireful o' long faces." Dogman winced. The crazy hillman was hardly what he needed to lift his mood, grinning out of the night with his children behind him, great big weapons over their shoulders. Crummock was down to just the two now, since one of his sons got killed up in the mountains, But he didn't seem so upset about it. He'd lost his spear too, snapped off in some Easterner, as he was fond of saying, so he still didn't have to carry aught himself. Neither one of the children had said much since the battle, or not in the dogman's hearing anyway. No more talk about how many menfolk might have killed. The scene of it close up could be a woeful drain on your enthusiasm for the business of war. Dogman knew well enough how that went. But Crummock himself had no trouble keeping cheerful. Where's Ninefingers got himself off to? Gone off on his own. Always liked to do that before a duel. Crummock stroked at the finger bones round his neck. Speaking to the moon, I'll be bound. Shitting himself is closer to it, I reckon. Well, as long as you get the shitting done before the fight, I don't reckon anyone could grumble. He grinned all across his face. No one's loved of the moon like the bloody nine, I tell you. No one in all the wide circle of the world. He's got some kind of chance at winning a fair fight, and that's the best a man could hope for against that devil thing. There's only one problem. Just one. There'll be no fair fight as long as that damn witch is alive. The dogman felt his shoulders slump even further. How do you mean? Crummock spun one of the wooden signs on his necklace round and around. I can't see her letting Bethod lose and herself along with him, can you? A witch as clever as that one. There's all kinds of magic she could mix. All kinds of blessings and curses. All kinds of ways that bitch could tilt the outcome. As though the chances weren't tilted enough already. My point is this. Someone needs to stop her. Dogman hadn't thought he could feel any lower. Now he knew better. Good luck with that, he muttered. Ha-ha, my lad, ha-ha! I'd love to do it too, but they've got an awful stretch of walls down there, and I'm not much for climbing over 'em. Crummock slapped one fat hand against his fat belly. Twice too much meat for that. No. What we need for this task is a small man, but with great big fruits on him. No doubt we do, and the moon knows it. A man with a talent for creeping about, sharp-eyed and sure-footed. We need someone with a quick hand and a quick mind. He looked at the dogman, and he grinned. Now where is it that would find a man like that, do you reckon? You know what? Dogman put his face in his hands. I've no fucking idea. Logen lifted the battered flask to his lips and took a mouthful. He felt the sharp liquor tingling on his tongue, tickling at his throat. That old need to swallow. He leaned forward, pursed his lips, and blew it out in a fine spray. A gout of fire went up into the cold night. He peered into the darkness, saw nothing but the black outlines of tree trunks, the shifting black shadows that his fire cast between them. He shook the flask back and forth, heard the last measure sloshing inside. He shrugged his shoulders, put it to his mouth and tipped it all the way, felt it burn down to his stomach. The spirits could share with him tonight. Chances were good that after tomorrow, he wouldn't be calling on them again. 9 fingers. The voice rustled at him like the leaves falling. One spirit slid out from the shadows, came up into the light from the fire. There was no trace of recognition about it, and Logen found he was relieved. There was no accusation either. No fear, no distrust. It didn't care what he was, or what he'd done. Logen tossed the empty flask down beside him. On your own? Yes. Well, you're never alone if you bring laughter with you. The spirit said nothing. Reckon laughter's a thing for men, not for spirits. Yes. Don't speak much, do you? I did not call on you. True. I did not call on you. True. Logen stared into the fire. I have to fight a man tomorrow. A man called Fenris the Feared. He is not a man. You know of him then. He is old, by your reckoning. Nothing is old by my reckoning, but he goes back to the old time and beyond. He had another master then. What master? Glustrod. The name was like a knife in the ear. No name couldn't have been less expected, or less welcome. The wind blew cold through the trees, and memories of the towering ruins of Alcus crowded in on Logen, and made his back shiver. No chance it's some different Glustrod than the one came close to destroying half the world. There is no other. He it was that wrote the signs upon the feared skin, signs in the old tongue, the language of devils, across his left side. That flesh is of the world below, where the word of Glustrod is written. The feared cannot be harmed. Cannot be harmed. Not at all. Logen thought about it a moment. Why not write on both sides? Ask Glustrod. I don't think that's likely. No. A long pause. "What will you do, Nine Fingers?" Logen peered off sideways into the trees. The notion of setting off running and never looking back seemed a pretty one, right then. Sometimes it can be better to live with the fear of it than to die doing it, whatever Logen's father had told him. "I ran before," he muttered, "and I only ran a circle. For me, Bethod's at the end of every path. Then that is all our talk." The spirit stood up from the fire. "Perhaps I'll see you again." "I do not think so. The magic leaks from the world, and my kind sleep." "I do not think so. Even if you beat the feared, and I do not think you will." "Message o' hope then, eh?" Logen snorted. "Luck go with you." The spirit faded back into the darkness and was gone. It did not wish Logen luck. It did not care. Chapter 33, Authority. It was a dour and depressing meeting even for the closed council. The weather beyond the narrow windows was sullen and overcast, promising storms but never delivering, casting the white chamber into a chill gloom. From time to time heavy gusts of wind would rattle the old window panes, making Jezal start and shiver in his fur-trimmed robe. The grim expressions of the dozen old faces did little to warm his bones. Lord Marshal Varus was all clenched jaw and harsh determination. Lord Chamberlain Hoff clutched his goblet like a drowning man clinging to the last fragment of his boat. High Justice Morovia frowned as though he were about to pronounce the death sentence on the entire gathering, himself among them. Archlector Zolt's thin lip was permanently curled as his cold eyes slid from Bayaz to Jezal to Morovia and back. The first of the Magi himself glared down the table. "The situation, please, Lord Marshal Varus. The situation, honestly, is grim. Adua is in uproar. Perhaps 1/3 of the population has already fled. The Gurkish blockade means that few supplies are making it to the markets. Curfews are in place, but some citizens are still seizing the opportunity to rob, steal, and riot while the authorities are occupied elsewhere." Morovia shook his head, gray beard swaying gently. "And we can only expect the situation to deteriorate as the Gurkish come closer to the city." "Which they are," said Varus, "at the rate of several miles a day. We are doing all we can to frustrate them, but with our resources so limited they may well be outside the gates within the week." There were a few shocked gasps, breathed oaths, nervous sideways glances. "So soon?" Jezal's voice cracked slightly as he said it. "I am afraid so, Your Majesty." "What is the Gurkish strength?" asked Morovia. "Estimates vary wildly. At present, however," and Varus sucked worriedly at his teeth, "it appears they field at least 50,000. There were further sharp intakes of breath, not least from Jezal's own throat. "So many," muttered Halleck, "and thousands more landing every day near Keln," put in Admiral Rosser, doing nothing to lift the mood. "With the best part of our navy on its way to retrieve the army after its northern adventure, we are powerless to stop them." Jezal licked his lips. The walls of the wide room seemed to close in further with every moment. "What of our troops?" Varus and Rutzer exchanged a brief glance. "We have 2 regiments of the king's own, one of foot and one of horse, some 6,000 men in all. The Grey Watch, tasked with the defense of the Agrient itself, numbers 4,000. The Knights Herald and of the Body form an elite of some 500. In addition, there are non-combat soldierskooks, grooms, smiths, and so forth, who could be armed in an emergency." "I believe this qualifies," observed Bayaz. "Perhaps some few thousand more. The city watch might be of some use, but they are hardly professional soldiers." "What of the nobles?" asked Morovia. "Where is their aid? Some few have sent men," said Varus grimly. "Others only their regrets. Most not even that. Hedging their bets." Hoff shook his head. "Brock has let it be known there will be Gurkish gold for those who help him, and Gurkish mercy for those who stand with us." "It has ever been so," lamented Torlicorm. "The nobles are interested only in their own welfare." "Then we must open the armories," said Bayaz, "and we must not be shy with their contents. We must honor every citizen who can hold a weapon. We must arm the laborers' guilds, and the craftsmen's guilds, and the veterans' associations. Even the beggars in the gutters must be ready to fight." All well and good, Jezal supposed, but he hardly cared to trust his life to a legion of beggars. When will Lord Marshal West return with the army? If he received his orders yesterday, It will be a month, at the very least, before he is disembarked and ready to come to our aid. Which means we must withstand several weeks of siege, muttered Hoff, shaking his head. He leaned close to Jezal's ear and spoke softly, quite as if they were schoolgirls trading secrets. Your Majesty, it might be prudent for you and your closed council to leave the city, to relocate your government further north, outside the path of the Gurkish advance, where the campaign can be conducted in greater safety. To Holstorm, perhaps, or absolutely not, said Bayaz sternly. Jezal could scarcely deny that the notion held its attractions. The island of Shabulian at that moment seemed an ideal place to relocate his government to, but Bayaz was right. Harad the Great would hardly have entertained the idea of retreat, and neither, unfortunately, could Jezal. We will fight the Gurkish here, he said. Merely a suggestion, muttered Hoff. Merely prudence. Bayaz spoke over him. How do the defenses of the city stand? We have, in essence, 3 concentric lines of defense. The Agrient itself is, of course, our last bastion. It will not come to that, though, eh? Chuckled Hoff with far from total conviction. Varus decided not to answer. Arnos wall is beyond it, enclosing the oldest and most crucial parts of the city-tithe Agrient, the middle way, the main docks and the 4 corners among them. Casimir's wall is our outermost line of defense, weaker, lower, and a great deal longer than Arnolf's. Smaller walls run between these two, like the spokes of a wheel, dividing the outer ring of the city into 5 boroughs, each of which can be sealed off, should it be captured by the enemy. There are some built-up areas beyond Casimir's wall, but those must be immediately abandoned. Bayaz planted his elbows on the edge of the table, his meaty fists clasped together. Given the number and quality of our troops, we would be best served by evacuating the outer quarters of the city and concentrating our efforts around the much shorter and stronger length of Arnolf's wall. We can continue to fight a rear-guard action in the outer boroughs, where our superior knowledge of the streets and buildings stands in our favor. No, said Jezal. Bayaz fixed him with a brooding stare. Your Majesty. But Jezal refused to be overawed. It had been becoming clear for some time that if he allowed the Magus to rule him on every issue, then he would never escape from under his boot. He might have seen Bayaz make a man explode with a thought, but he was hardly likely to do it to the King of the Union before his own closed council. Not with the Gurkish breathing down all their necks. I do not intend to give up the greater part of my capital to the Union's oldest enemy without giving battle. We will defend Casimir's wall, and fight for every stride of ground. Varus glanced across at Hoff, and the Chamberlain raised his eyebrows by the tiniest fraction. Of course, Your Majesty. Every stride. There was an uncomfortable silence, the displeasure of the first of the Magi hanging over the group, as heavily as the storm clouds hung over the city. Does my Inquisition have anything to contribute? Croaked Jezal, doing his best to mount a diversion. Sult's eyes darted coldly up to his. Of course, Your Majesty. The Gurkish love of intrigue is well known. We have no doubt that there are already spies within the walls of Adua, perhaps within the Agrient itself. All citizens of Cantic origin are now being interned. My inquisitors are working day and night in the House of Questions. Several spies have already confessed. Morovia snorted. So we are expected to suppose that the Gurkish love of intrigue does not extend to the hiring of white-skinned agents. We are at war, hissed Sult, giving the High Justice a deadly glare. The very sovereignty of our nation is at risk. This is no time for your blether about freedom, Morovia. On the contrary, this is precisely the time. The 2 old men bickered on, straining everyone's frayed nerves to the breaking point. Bayaz, meanwhile, had sunk back into his chair and folded his arms, watching Jezal with an expression of calm consideration, which was, if anything, even more fearsome than his frown. Jezal felt the worry weighing ever heavier upon him. However you looked at things, he was teetering on the verge of having the briefest and most disastrous reign in Union history. I'm sorry that I had to send for Your Majesty, piped Gorst, in his girlish little voice. Of course. The clicking of Jezal's polished boot heels echoed angrily around them. There is only so much that I can do, of course. Jezal shoved open the double doors with both hands. Therese sat bolt upright in the midst of the gilded chamber beyond, glaring at him down her nose in that manner with which he had become so infuriatingly familiar. as though he were an insect in her salad. Several Styrian ladies looked up and then back to their tasks. Chests and boxes cluttered the room. Clothes were being neatly packed within. Every impression was given that the Queen of the Union was planning to leave the capital, and without so much as informing her husband. Jezal ground his already aching teeth. He was tormented by a disloyal closed council, a disloyal open council, and a disloyal populace. The poisonous disloyalty of his wife was almost too much to bear. What the hell is this? I and my ladies can hardly assist you in your war with the Emperor. Therese turned her flawless head smoothly away from him. We are returning to Talons. Impossible, hissed Jezal. A Gurkish army of many thousands is bearing down upon the city. My people are fleeing Adua in droves, and those that remain are a whisker from sliding into outright panic. Your leaving now would send entirely the wrong message. I cannot allow it. Her Majesty is in no way involved, snapped the Countess Shaler, gliding across the polished floor towards him. As though Jezal had not enough to worry about with the Queen herself, he was now obliged to bandy words with her companions. You forget yourself, he snarled at her. It is you who forgets. She took a step towards him. Her face twisted. You forget that you are a bastard son, and a scarred one at. The back of Jezal's hand cracked sharply into her sneering mouth, and sent her reeling back with an ungainly gurgle. She tripped over her dress and collapsed on the floor, one shoe flying from her flailing foot and off into the corner of the room. I am a king, and in my own palace. I refuse to be spoken to in this manner by a glorified lady's maid. The voice came out, flat, cold, and frighteningly commanding. It scarcely sounded like his own, but who else's could it be? He was the only man in the room. I see that I have been far too generous with you, and that you have mistaken my generosity for weakness. The 11 ladies stared at him, and at their fallen comrade, crumpled on the ground with one hand to her bloody mouth. If any of your witches should desire to depart these troubled shores, I will arrange passage for them, and even pull an oar myself with a light heart. But you, your Majesty, will be going nowhere. Therese had leaped up from her seat and was glowering at him, body rigid. You heartless brute, she began to hiss. We may both wholeheartedly wish it were otherwise, he roared over her. But we are married. The time to raise objections to my parentage or my person or to any other facet of our situation was before you became Queen of the Union. Despise me all you wish, Therese, but you go nowhere. And Jezal swept the dumbstruck ladies with a baleful glare, turned on his polished heel, and stalked from the airy salon. Damn it, but his hand hurt. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.